So, Asha, thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm really excited to talk more with you and sort of like pick your brain on all of this stuff. It's going to be so much fun. But before we dive in, I want to kind of take a moment to learn a little bit more about you. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that I read that your introduction into astrology sort of came from a place of wanting to disprove it. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, Cassandra. Actually, and first, I would love to thank you for having me on. I can't wait to have this discussion with you. We're going to have so much fun today. But yeah, it's actually really funny because I'm a Scorpio, so I'm naturally skeptical about everything,
Yeah.
And originally, when I had my first astrology chart reading, I went in there kind of with like a smug face and some skepticism. And I was like, I'm going to prove this person wrong. Like, they're not going to be able to figure out anything about me. Right. And the more that she was talking, the more that I realized, wow, there's something really to this, but I still don't quite believe it. Like, I'm still skeptical.
Yeah.
So then I came home and I started doing my own research with the intent to disprove astrology, right? And because I have actually a lot of Scorpio in my chart, I can become like an obsessive researcher where it just goes into like, again, I can't think of a better word besides obsession. So I just kept researching and researching. And the more that I was researching and learning and educating myself about astrology, the more I was proven wrong. And I've had to sit back and be like, holy shit, there's something to this. The more I was trying to discredit it, the more that I was discredited in trying to, prove it wrong. So that's the irony of that. And then I just started diving in and I was like, oh my God, I'm so fascinated with this. And it was one of those things that's kind of like an onion. The more layers I peeled back, the more that I learned about astrology, the more I realized how much there is to learn about it. I've been doing it for like 8 or 9 years for fun now at this point, and I still am learning something new every single day that I didn't know before. So to me, that's just like what makes the topic so fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's such a neat story how you got into everything. So a personal note, I'm curious, can you share with us like was there one particular thing where you were like, "Oh my gosh," that you discovered that really hit home when you were first learning about astrology?
I think certain like placements in my chart just made me feel more understood, or I always thought like, oh, why was I doing things differently than other people, or why was this happening? And it really helped me feel seen for the first time where I didn't feel
Mm.
seen for a long time. And in addition to that, I think when I started to go back and look at certain patterns or cycles in my life, I started to realize, oh, there was an eclipse happening in my life during this time, or my life, I was going through this Saturn return phase, or I was going through this. And once I understood what all of those things meant, I was like, okay, that's why things transpired the way that they did. So I think it just gave me a lot of understanding with why certain things happened the way that they did, and also ways that I could handle future cycles much easier, because I think this is really one of the most important things to understand about astrology is it's not here. I'm not here to like cause fear or anything like that. I don't like all the fear mongering that comes with it. It's
Yeah.
more to have an understanding. When we understand the archetypes of the planets, what their purpose is, what they're here to teach us, or where the opportunities are, when we go through certain cycles, it really helps to navigate those like stormy waters a little bit better. So I
Yeah.
think for me, that's why I really wanted to start doing readings for other people, because I'm like, oh, if you understand what phase of life you're in, if you understand where these eclipses are hitting in your life, then when they come, you won't be so blindsided. You'll understand why everything is happening.
Yeah. Oh, that was so beautifully spoken. Thank you. I love
Oh,
it.
you're so welcome.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with all that. And so, getting to our topic today is eclipses. And
Yeah.
we've already, I've heard you already start to discuss a little bit about it. And I don't know if you know this, but actually, my eclipses have been so intriguing to me, for one,
Mm.
because I had a spontaneous instantaneous spiritual awakening on an eclipse.
Which
And
eclipse was that for you? Do you remember?
yes, I do. The Gemini solar eclipse that was in 2021. I started to awaken like just the day it was like unfolding the day before. And then like after the 10th, it was just like full blown, total different person. And I mean, I came from a religiously abusive upbringing. So I was not entertaining this stuff. It was like a complete 180 on who I was. So I'm so excited to have you here today to talk about it. So I
Actually,
feel like,
I want to just make a comment about that eclipse for you specifically, because I'm looking at your chart right now. And that was a ninth house in the whole sign house system. That was a ninth house eclipse for you.
Yeah.
And ninth houses are generally like, that's the knowledge house and the house of philosophy, but it's also the house of beliefs and belief systems. A lot of times this is spiritual beliefs, sometimes religious beliefs, political beliefs. So sometimes when people have eclipses in the ninth house, something kind of upends your entire belief system that you've had your whole life.
Yeah.
So it's not really surprising to me that like you grew up in this very strict religious household, and suddenly you have an eclipse in your house of religion and beliefs and knowledge and learning, and your entire belief system changes.
Yeah. Yeah. It was so incredible. But so that's one example, but I would love to hear in your words, can you share with our listeners, why eclipses are important, and understanding them, or why is it they tend to bring transformation? Just anything you can share with us about understanding eclipses better.
Yeah, sure. Okay, where do we begin?
Open can of worms. Now go.
Okay, got it. So every single month we have a full moon and a new moon, right? That's nothing new. They're always in a different sign and they always have a purpose, right? That's energy we're pretty familiar with. And then every 6 months we have eclipses that happen. And they always come in pairs. There's always a set of two, and there's always one, and 2 weeks later, there's another one. So every 6 months, we have two eclipses. Then the next 6 months later, we have another two, so on and so forth, right? So they always come in pairs. And that's why we call it eclipse season and not just eclipse day, because essentially there's always one and then another one back to back 2 weeks later. And eclipses are almost what I would like to say, and a lot of astrologers I've heard use this term as well, is eclipses are almost like full moons and new moons on steroids. So if you think about the intensity that we sometimes feel during certain full moons or new moon cycles, this energy really, really intensified and amplified. And generally speaking, and the way this manifests for everybody is a little bit different, but generally speaking, eclipses signify endings and beginnings. They're almost always associated with the north node and the south node that's currently in the sky, usually. And the nodes are very much related to karma, destiny, fate, past life karma, current karma, all of these things. So when eclipses happen, they can be a little bit chaotic for some people. I like to tell clients all the time that if something falls off during an eclipse, it was not meant to continue on with you on your journey moving forward.
Yeah.
Nothing that ends during an eclipse or during eclipse season is happening to you. It's always happening for you. And eclipses generally signify endings and beginnings. They close doors so that new ones can open. But if you've had a door that has already closed in a previous eclipse, or you've taken the initiative or free will to close whatever doors you were closing, an eclipse can actually bring in a new beginning or a new door opening as well. For example, let's say like intuitively you've been feeling, I don't want to stay at this job. I don't really know if I want to stay here, or any of your listeners, for example, right? And the last eclipse that we had, for example, they either got fired or they quit their job and stuff. This next wave of eclipses can actually open a new job or a new door or a new opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
So they're not always doom and gloom, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, would you say, we've got the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse. Would you say is there a difference in energy or theme based on which of these eclipse there is?
Yeah, so usually, and again, that manifests differently for different people. Also, if you have like personal planets in these signs, and if the eclipse is hitting where it's hitting in your personal chart is also important. But on a general basis, lunar eclipses tend to be more internal. So there's a lot more like releasing and processing, and solar eclipses tend to be more action based.
Okay.
Typically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have our first eclipse this spring is going to be a lunar eclipse. So there's going to be like a lot more reflecting that's happening during that eclipse, or a lot more karmic clearing because it's a
Hmm.
south node eclipse. And we'll start talking about that when we get to it. And then like the next eclipse 2 weeks later is a solar eclipse. So I feel like that one's going to be a lot more action packed as opposed to internalized.
Yeah. And with the solar eclipse, that's new moon energy, which,
Yeah.
we know can represent like beginnings or startings, which
Mm-hmm.
I think is what which lines up with what you're saying as far
Yeah.
as beginning or action,
Yeah.
movement forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So awesome. I know personally for me, I tend to enjoy. I'm trying to think. For the most part, I want to say I do feel more motivated on new moons
Mm-hmm.
than full moons. I guess maybe that could be that reflective quality of lunar, but it also probably depends on where in the chart. But I
Yeah.
know for both of them, I have trouble sleeping.
Right.
I do know that.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I'm excited because we're going to dive into what the upcoming eclipses for 2024 mean. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel like you have set a wonderful foundation now for our
Thank you.
listeners, on what eclipses are and their importance. And I'm super excited to dive in. So
Yeah.
let's.
Let's get started. Okay. Let's just dive right in. So our first eclipse of eclipse season this spring is going to be on March 25th. And that is a south node lunar eclipse in Libra. Now, this one is the second eclipse in Libra in a series of 3 that we are having. The first eclipse that we had in Libra was last year on October 14th, 2023. So for everybody, anyone listening, I really encourage you to either go back and check a planner or a calendar or wherever, hopefully anywhere where you've taken notes, and reflect back on what was happening mid-October. By the way, when I give dates for eclipses, it doesn't always mean that something happens on that exact day, right? Just like we can feel a full moon for a few days before,
Yeah.
we are in eclipse season and eclipse energy sometimes for like up to 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after eclipses. So it doesn't always mean that something happens on the exact day of the date that I give you. And sometimes some people are walking astrology metaphors that it does manifest that way for them. But essentially, throughout October, like mid-October, what was the theme going on in your life? Was something ending? Was something new beginning? Because whatever that theme was that was in the south node in Libra, it's going to come back around this March again. Now, this could be like, again, like I said earlier, that a door closed in October and now a new door opens. It could also be something a little bit more subtle, like maybe you were dealing with something in your life and you thought you've resolved it. And now during this eclipse, it kind of brings that theme back around. And for someone, they may be like, why is this coming back around in my life? Like, I thought I already resolved this. I thought I already dealt with this. If it's coming back around, it means there still needs to be some clearing. And the reason why I say clearing is because the south node is in Libra. And if it's a south node eclipse, it usually means there's a type of clearing that needs to happen, right? When we have north node eclipses, it's more of where we're going towards and what we want to be striving towards, as opposed to south node eclipses, that's more of what we need to be releasing and clearing.
That's good. Yeah. So, and just to clarify, because I think what you just said was so important for our listeners, can you define again a little bit in your own words what the South Node and the North Node, as you were just stating?
Yeah. So, in everyone's personal birth charts, we all have a North Node placement and a South Node placement. And the understanding of these placements is that the south node is more of what we've mastered in past lifetimes. It's the energy that we're good at. It's where our gifts and our talents are, right? Like things that may become really natural to us that maybe we even take for granted because it comes so easily to us. We just assume it's easy to other people as well, right? So there's a lot of goodness in the South Node, but also because it's energy from the past, there's also a lot of karmic clearing that is involved with the South Node that we need to release, because the North Node is always the complete opposite energy of whatever the South Node is. And the North Node is why we reincarnated into this lifetime. It's essentially what you're supposed to be learning in this lifetime, not what you mastered in past lifetimes, but what you're learning in this lifetime. I know I just said that already, but almost like a new journey that you're on, a new quest, a new karmic experience that you're supposed to be stepping into. So when we have North Node eclipses, they're pushing us towards our destiny. They're pushing us towards our fate. They're pushing us towards the future. And we have, when we have South Node eclipses, they're more about, again, karmic endings, releasing things, and closing chapters on things that hold us back from moving towards our destiny.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And so that would be the eclipse coming up is a South Node eclipse.
Yes, that's the South Node eclipse in Libra.
Okay.
That's where the South Node is in the sky currently.
Okay. Awesome. And that's in March.
March 25th.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome.
And then 2 weeks later, we have a solar eclipse, which is a little bit more action-packed, right? It's a North Node solar eclipse. It's a new moon solar eclipse in Aries. And the last time we had one of these eclipses was April 20th of 2023. So I'm going to give the same advice that I gave for the South Node eclipse. What was happening in your life around mid to end of April? Because that's the last time, so almost a year ago, right? That's the last time that we had an eclipse in this area of your life. So maybe something ended during that time, so this will bring something new in. Maybe something new started, and this could be like, maybe if you started a new job last April, this could be like a promotion of that job or something like that, right? Like a new opportunity or new beginning there as well, because it is a new moon solar eclipse. The thing that I want to mention about this one, though, is at the same time of this solar eclipse on April 8th, we are also having a Mercury retrograde in Aries in the same exact sign at the same time of this eclipse. So we have a solar eclipse in Aries, we have a Mercury retrograde in Aries overlapping each other. And so, which is interesting because eclipses generally bring fresh starts, new beginnings, and Mercury retrogrades are notorious for bringing delays and miscommunications and misunderstandings. So if you're like waiting for that fresh start and there's like, you know, you almost may feel like there's like a false start or like you're still waiting on things, that energy can feel, it should feel temporary. It's more about what I like to say that people need to do during retrogrades is do a lot more reflecting and reviewing and reassessing of things to make sure that like this is actually where you want to move forward. So there should be a lot, it's going to be a weird dichotomy, I think, because there's so much energy to amplify into the new, but then you might feel like, oh my God, I'm so ready for this. And then suddenly there's like a delay.
Yeah. It almost feels like in hearing you describe it, it's like my mind is just being curious, and I'm just picturing myself being the Aries that I am.
Yep, your sun is there.
eager to jump and start and action, and kind of it's like when you're describing this, I'm almost feeling it like Mercury's like tapping you on the shoulder. It's like, hey, are you sure? You know, let's think about that for a moment before we get started. I don't know. That's kind of how I'm sensing what you're describing. It's like that. That's like, okay, guys, here we go, but let's make sure.
Well, by the way, there's so much Aries energy this April, which I'll talk a little bit more about, so we can understand the full significance of this eclipse, because this one's going to feel like a rocket, I think, for a lot of people. April is a very big astrological month for the year, essentially. But what I want to emphasize with a Mercury retrograde going on in April during this eclipse season at the same time is I also don't want fear and doom and gloom around retrogrades either, right? For retrogrades, we want to make sure that we're reviewing all the rewords, right? Review, reflect, reassess, reevaluate, whatever other reword that I can't think of right now. And so the reason why this is important is because maybe with this eclipse, we have all this momentum and all this activation, all this increased energy, right? Where we're like, okay, I'm ready to get started, right? Let's say hypothetically, and I had a client who this happened to, right? She had so much momentum to launch her site, and she just kept having delays because she wanted to launch during a retrograde, and she just kept having delays over and over and over again, and it forced her to sit back and reevaluate and reassess certain things on her website. Because she had the extra time to do that and she didn't just jump the gun on it, she was able to notice flaws on her website that maybe she would have missed before. So that when she finally launched the website after the retrograde, she didn't have the website crash on her when she was getting increased traffic, because she spent the extra few weeks during the retrograde reviewing everything, reassessing everything. So retrogrades are not always, like, again, another doom and gloom thing. We want to make sure that we're using them wisely. So if there are delays, that's the time you review something. That's the time you reflect on something. Maybe there's something you're missing that you need to, again, reassess or fix before launching, before taking off in that rocket that like has inspired you during that eclipse.
Yeah, yeah, that's great advice. I love it. Awesome. So that would be both of the eclipses in the, what would you say, like springtime?
In the springtime, yeah.
Yeah. What's in store for the eclipses later in the year?
Okay, well, those are also really interesting because in September, on September 17th and 18th, the reason why I'm giving 2 dates is because they kind of overlap depending on which time zone you're in.
Yeah.
For some people, it'll be on the 17th. For some people, it'll be on the 18th. But we actually have our first eclipse in Pisces, and we haven't had one of these in a really, really, really long time. So that eclipse is going to be a full moon lunar eclipse in Pisces. And that one is going to be really interesting because we also have Neptune in Pisces right now, and we have Saturn in Pisces right now. And it's really interesting with both of these energies because Neptune brings like a fantasy with it, a dream world with it, right? Like there's so much fantasizing when Neptune's around, but Neptune can also bring like a disillusionment and an idealism with it, where we get like distorted visions, right? Almost like wearing rose-colored glasses and not seeing the reality of the situation. And then with Saturn in Pisces at the same time, Saturn is like the reality check. So we have an eclipse activating a new part of our chart that we haven't had for years and years and years. And essentially, we also have these two planets that are like activating your fantasy and your dream world, but also giving you a reality check at the same time. It's almost going to be like an energy of like idealism versus realism, I would say, during this eclipse at the same time.
Awesome.
So that's the first eclipse in September. Yeah.
Awesome.
And then the next one, again, 2 weeks later, is going to be October 2nd. And that is going to be another South Node Libra eclipse. But this one's going to be a new moon solar eclipse, where the first Libra eclipse of this year. So we have essentially, let me back up a little bit. Essentially, we have 2 Libra eclipses this year, one in March and one in October. And then we have an Aries eclipse in April, and then we have a Pisces eclipse in September. The eclipse in October, where this one's going to be a new moon solar eclipse. This one in March, the past one in March that's going to be happening, is going to be a full moon lunar eclipse. So they're going to feel different. Even though they're activating the same part of your chart, they're going to feel different because one is a lunar eclipse and one is a solar eclipse. So in October, that's going to be October 2nd of this year. And the reason why I'm mentioning that again is it's important. What I would recommend to you and all your listeners is to write down what's happening in March, at the end of March, in this area of your chart, wherever Libra is in your chart, because whatever that theme was that happened last October, October 14th, 2023, it's going to come back around, and some version of that theme is going to come back around in March, and then it's going to come back around next October on October 2nd. So I think it would be really helpful if people write down what's happening in March in this area of their life, so that when October comes, October 2nd, 2024, you have something to reference back to. Now you can say, oh, you know what? There's another Libra eclipse happening October 2nd. Asya told me I should go back and look at my notes. Let me see what was happening in March 2024, so I can kind of get an idea of like what the theme is going to be in October.
Gotcha. Yeah. Awesome. And you've talked a lot about the different energies as far as the signs, and the different energies as far as whether it's, solar eclipse or lunar eclipse. Um, can we talk a little bit more about, if there's someone listening and they really want to kind of look in how it's influencing them personally? Can we talk a little bit about the houses
Yeah,
and
sure.
the significance of where these energies are for someone, based on where Pisces is, where Libra and Aries are in their chart?
Yeah, of course. I'm also, if you're all right with this, I want to use your chart as an example as well, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I'd
and we
love
will talk
that.
about that in a second, but I want to mention that as a reminder to everybody, eclipses usually they signify endings and beginnings. So normally chapters close and new chapters begin. Now, let's say, okay, let's talk about your chart first. So you are a Libra rising.
Yes.
So this first eclipse, for example, if someone is curious, right? That's hitting your first house. And that is your house of you. That's where your chart begins. It's essentially like the most important part of your chart because it's essentially where your chart starts, right? So it's the house of your image, your body, how you look, how other people see you, your perspective, first impressions. It's the house of your self identity. So when we have first house eclipses, there's a lot of focus on us, or there's a lot of things that happen to put the focus back on us. So I'm not sure if you remember, and you don't have to share if you don't feel comfortable, but I'm not sure if you remember what was happening in October, mid-October of last year. But ideally, an example of this would be something would have happened in your life to help bring the focus back to you, because that's what's happening during the eclipse, right? It's essentially trying to put the focus back to you. Now, after that, 2 weeks later, you're going to have an eclipse in your seventh house of relationships and partnerships. And this is really interesting because when people have like first house eclipses and seventh house eclipses, it almost feels like a seesaw, right? Where suddenly, like, you have all this attention on you're like you're very self-focused because you need to be self-focused, right? The eclipse is bringing all this energy back to focus on yourself. And now suddenly the focus is on a partner or a partnership, right? And so 2 weeks later, you're going to have like an activation in that part of your chart. So it's going to feel, like I said, like almost like a ping pong match back and forth, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, you know what? I've forgotten about myself. I need to put the focus back on me. I need to make sure I'm making myself a priority. What am I doing for me? Right? Like, I need to have self-care, all this stuff, right? And then 2 weeks later, it could be like suddenly either you meet somebody new, or if you're with a partner, they could be like, hello, have you forgotten about me? Like, what is going on? You're just like really focused on yourself right now. Like, I'm also here. And then you're like, oh, wait, that's right. I'm in a partnership. I need to also focus on my partner. And, you know, therefore now the seventh house eclipse is making you focus back on your partner. And then in October, this eclipse is going to activate the self part of your chart again, where you're like, oh shit, maybe I've lost myself in partnership a little bit. Maybe I've put too much focus on my partner. Now I have to put the focus back on me again. So what's really interesting is when we have eclipses specifically in the first house and the seventh house, for example, right? There's like I said earlier, a seesaw effect back and forth where like you're very self-focused and then you're very relationship focused, and then you're self-focused and then you're relationship focused. And it's going to feel like an imbalance where like you go from one extreme to the next extreme and then the next extreme and then the next extreme. And the goal after these eclipse cycles is to find balance, right? How do I balance both of these things? How do I show up in partnership and relationship in a healthy way, but not lose myself? How do I still put myself first, but still make sure I have enough time to show up in a relationship with somebody else? That's like an
Which
example of how that can manifest.
which is so interesting because my son is
Mm-hmm.
in the seventh house.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's like eclipse or not. That's the story of my life. The like, where am I versus others?
Mm-hmm.
And I know, especially with my son in my seventh house, I've had to go through a lot of journeys of um, coming on the other side of like people pleasing and
Yeah.
codependency and getting lost in who I am versus who others are and the
Yeah.
relationships that I've had. Yeah.
That's also part of your South Node in Aquarius as well, because in past lives, you were really focused on others and humanity and how you can show up on like a collective level. And your North Node is in Leo. So it's really, there's almost like and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but with this placement, a lot of times what I notice with clients is there's almost like a guilt if you put yourself first because you feel selfish. And
Yeah.
there's like a need for you to learn to put yourself first, because by putting yourself first, you actually inspire others to do the same.
Yeah, which is also a very contradicting part of my chart
Yeah.
because my North Node is in the 11th house, which is ruled by Aquarius. So once again, it's like this teeter talent, back and forth between balance of those energies. How can I be who I am, influent, but also be a part of the community, and navigate that, because Leo in the 11th house is totally different feeling than its natural ruler. So
yeah, but also I would say that that's also like showing up in your creativity in groups, right? In community, like being bold and being bold and brave and courageous and creative, because when you show up that way in those communal aspects, that is also how you're going to inspire others to do the same. So it's not about just like being in the group, right? It's about how do I show up in a bold way in the group.
Which I'm really trying.
That's good. That's good. You're doing the right thing.
Been a journey. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
By the way, the North Node is a journey, right? Our South Node, because it's energy we've mastered in past lifetimes, it's where our comfort zone is. We're good at it. So we're like, you know what? I want to stay here because I'm comfortable here. So the North Node for everybody, wherever their particular North Node placement is, it's going to feel uncomfortable because the South Node is our comfort zone and the North Node is the complete, it's not just different energy, it's the complete opposite energy. So it's meant to feel uncomfortable and unfamiliar, but it's what we're supposed to be learning throughout our lifetime here.
Yeah, that's good. Now, I'd love if maybe could you give us an example just so the listener can really kind of digest what you're saying. So let's use an example. Let's say perhaps somebody has the first eclipse in their third house. Can you talk about like what the third house is and give an example of that person where the focus is in that particular first eclipse that we have in March?
Yeah. So the third house is related to communication. It is how you speak, how you think. It's also a lot of times tools we use for communication, right? Whether that's writing or podcasting or public speaking or vlogging or all of these things, right? Computers, phones, TVs, like all of these are also third house themes. For some people, third house is also siblings and neighbors. That's also a theme that comes up with third houses. And sometimes those two kind of interject together or blend together, right? It could be like communication with siblings and neighbors. So that's how that can also connect together in that way. But when I generally have clients have third house eclipses, there's like a door that ends up opening or closing in regards to how they're supposed to communicate, how they're supposed to be speaking. I have clients who have third house eclipses who suddenly launch a podcast, or they start writing something, or they start journaling, or they have like, they find a new modality of how they're communicating. And usually when we have third house eclipses, we also have ninth house eclipses, and ninth house eclipses, that's where the axis is. And ninth house eclipses is all about learning and your belief system. So when we have third house eclipses and ninth house eclipses, it's almost like what you're learning and how you're communicating what you're learning.
I love it. That was so good. That was so easy to digest and absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So the other question I had for you is when we're considering eclipses, I want to talk a little bit about aspects, and I'm just kind of lightly for our listener going to touch on, when we're talking aspects, let's just call these like connect the dots, where certain placements line up with others without getting getting too complex, and this generally can result in something favorable or more challenging. Like we've talked about, the South Node and the North Node are in opposition. So that's that pull back and forth between two things. So that is considered, an aspect if those are connecting. Yeah. So when we're considering aspects such as this to other placements, I'm curious, is there any significance to your natal positions in your chart to aspects, or is that more relevant to any aspects that are, kind of transiting only and not connecting to the natal chart? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
And please interrupt me or correct me if I get, if I start going off on a tangent.
Oh no,
really
go for it. I love it.
So it's very important to also, we're talking on a general basis, but it's also really important to understand, this is why it's so important to understand our natal chart as well, right? Because maybe for somebody who's having an eclipse, a North Node Aries eclipse, they won't feel it as much, but maybe that North Node eclipse is activating their personal North Node placement or their personal sun or their personal moon. So they're going to feel it in a way more impactful way than somebody who maybe doesn't have Aries in their chart at all. So this is why astrology becomes so layered, because it doesn't just depend on what placements you have in your chart and what signs. It's like, how is everything transiting in the sky right now? And how is it aspecting your current natal chart, right? Sometimes we have conjunctions that really activate certain things. And a conjunction is when they meet up together at the same sign, at the same point. But then we also have oppositions where they're opposing each other, right? That's why it's called an opposition. And maybe instead of feeling inspired to move forward, suddenly there's a tension and we don't know what to do, right? Or it could feel combative for some people in a way, or maybe there's a square, right? That's almost a 90-degree angle. And suddenly you're feeling a challenge, but it's squares are not always bad, by the way. It's an inspired challenge, right? Without challenge, we don't have growth. So a lot of these things do depend on your personal placements. For example, if somebody has their personal North Node in Aries right now, that eclipse is going to activate your North Node. And we just talked about how North Node is going to feel uncomfortable, but it's going to be pushing you towards your destiny, your karma, where you're supposed to be going. So that eclipse can activate so much in regards to your destiny for you. And if somebody has their South Node there, right? And they're having a South Node Libra eclipse in their South Node, for example, just we're using these specific examples, that eclipse can activate an ending of some sort for some people. Maybe a relationship needs to end, or a friendship needs to end, or a job needs to end, so that you can step into your North Node journey and new doors can open for you that are destined to open for you.
That's great. Yeah. I think that on the April eclipse, it is in a fairly tight aspect opposition to my Pluto on that one.
Let me take a look at your chart. Yeah, it's almost directly opposing that. Yeah. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. But, so the eclipse is going to be at 19 degrees, by the way, and your sun is at 18 degrees Aries.
Yes.
And your Pluto is at 20 degrees Libra. So here's the thing about Pluto that I would like to say is Pluto likes to reveal things. So Pluto is, the great revealer planet. So a lot of times it doesn't stir up drama and cause drama for the sake of it, right? That's more of Mars. Mars is an instigator. Pluto reveals things that have always been there. Either they've been hidden from us, or we've had a blind spot to it, or we've chosen not to pay attention to it, or whatever it is. So sometimes when we have oppositions with Pluto, it can bring things to the surface that's always been happening that maybe you weren't aware was happening, or you chose not to pay attention to it, and now suddenly it's thrown in your face and you have to deal with it. A lot of times with Pluto too is there's a theme of power, almost always with Pluto, and power dynamics. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is also somehow a theme with this particular eclipse for you, especially because it's opposing your sun, and your sun is your ego and your vitality and where you should be feeling empowered the most, right? And then you have Pluto opposing it. So
Mhm.
there could be a theme of power and power dynamics that show up in your life specifically. And the lesson there is always, always, always with Pluto is to stay in your power, to be empowered. So whatever decisions you're making, it shouldn't be coming from a fear-based place or an anxiety-based place. It's like, how can I feel the most empowered in this decision during this eclipse cycle?
Yeah, that's so
That's the advice
good.
I would give, like based on your chart specifically. If that theme comes up for you, Cassandra, I want to make sure that like if you have to make a decision, right? Because all this energy is like activating your seventh house. It's going to be, does this make me feel empowered or does it make me feel powerless? And if it makes
Yeah,
you feel powerless, that means that that's the thing, that's the door that needs to close, right?
right.
But if you're feeling empowered, then maybe that's the door you walk through.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You've done a beautiful job. I think that this
Oh,
is
thank you.
wonderful, and I think that for our listeners, this has been so helpful. You've done a great job talking about how it relates to the houses and, consideration of some of the aspects. So I really want to make sure that we can get people to you. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you work with clients
Yeah,
and
sure.
maybe how they can connect with you?
So I do one-on-one sessions with clients. I also offer bundle packages because I've noticed a repeated theme that people really like to see what's coming up like the next 2 or 3 months and kind of get, you know, prepared or an idea of like how to ride the waves of the astrology as opposed to being blindsided by it. I do one-on-one sessions. You can find those on my website, and that's asyarose.com, ASYAROSE.com. I'm also on Instagram at AshaRose13. And I just started a YouTube channel very, very recently. So I'm also on
Woohoo!
YouTube under the same handle. So those are ways that you can find me. But most of my videos and stuff that I post are traditionally on Instagram. And, I respond to like DMs. So you can always shoot me a message. You can send me an email directly through my website. And yeah, that's how people can find me and reach me.
Awesome. Awesome. So, another question I always like to ask is, can you tell us a little bit more about what it is you're presently working on? And this could be personal or professional, that is really lighting you up and making you excited.
Okay. This is a lesson I'm continuously okay. This is a lesson I'm continuously learning is letting go of control because I am a control freak and which is ironic, right? Because I study astrology, I give people advice and stuff. I am trying to release more control of so much in my life, right? And just like going with the flow. I think that I really enjoy following my own astrology so I can kind of be prepared of what's happened. It's kind of also let me release some of the control because inherently I feel like, okay, I kind of understand the themes of what's happening, but I don't need to control every little part of it. So
Right.
control is like a really big thing for me that I have already, I feel like, learned leaps and bounds from where I used to be, but continues to show up in my life in very interesting ways, right? As the lessons always do, of like, do you stay in trust or are you still trying to
Mm-hmm.
control the situation? So that for
Yeah.
me, I feel like is something I still haven't mastered that I'm still learning.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
I can absolutely relate to that one too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's always like a fear. I do have a lot of Scorpio in my chart, and I find people with similar placements to me. There's like a hypervigilance that sometimes comes along with certain placements in astrology that like we feel like we have to control everything around us because if we let our guard down, like something bad can happen. So if something bad happens, we
Yeah.
want to be prepared. And so
Right.
I think what's important to understand is like, I don't have to always live my life that way, right? I don't always have to be hyper vigilant about everything. I can step in and be that way when I need to be, but I don't always have to be on guard expecting something to happen because we also don't want to have like self-fulfilling prophecies where suddenly things are happening because we're expecting them to happen.
Right, right. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. And I
Again, a
think
lesson I'm
that's,
still learning.
yeah. And I think that's awesome to hear an astrologer say that, because a lot of times you will see astrologers that will get so hyper fixated on things. So I think that's wonderful for you to share that perspective of like, yes, this is a tool that's here to help us, but there's still that inner reflection and divine surrender to what could be, and allowing life to kind of unfold. So I think that's awesome. Yeah, I think it's awesome.
I think when people, oh, sorry, I just want to say one more. I think when people, like, this is why it's helpful to understand the astrology, right? Like, you're getting a weather report. I'm telling you, Cassandra, it's going to rain outside tomorrow, right? This is the astrology of your chart. This is a metaphor I'm going to use, right? Yeah. It's going to rain outside tomorrow, but you still have free will to decide what you do about that. You can choose to go outside in the rain and wear a raincoat and an umbrella so that you're prepared because you know the rain is coming. Or if you decide not to be prepared, you can run outside in the rain naked, right? Because like you don't care if you get wet. Or because now you know the weather report, you can decide, I don't even want to go outside. I want to stay indoors and just watch Netflix all day. So essentially, we want to use the astrology, again, as a tool so we understand the weather, but we still have free will to decide what we do with the information that we're given.
Yeah, that perspective too, Do you like the rain? Are you going to choose to be, like you said, like, oh man, it's raining, it's going to rain. But I like the rain. So, but yeah, this has been wonderful. And I know that there's so much here that our listeners can chew on. Thank you so much for this conversation. Yeah. And in conclusion, for those listening, I hope that this has inspired curiosity, that you are just so excited to go look at your, astrology natal chart and kind of see where these placements are. I love how Asya talked about the different houses and how you can kind of take a peek at that and sort of self-contemplate on what it feels for you and go back. You've got some homework to see what was going on for the last eclipses. And I hope that this has inspired you and that you choose to use this astrology not for fear, but as an assisting tool to help you navigate this journey that we are in this earth experience. So thank you so much for listening. And until next time, have a lovely day. Bye.
Bye.
I am so excited about this episode because today we are going to be discussing astrology and specifically the up and coming eclipses for 2024. So today my special guest is Asya Rose. Asya is an astrologer and a coach with a passion for bringing astrology to everyone in a more practical, digestible way. She aims to help empower others through their birth chart to make informed decisions in their lives.